Aloha, everyone. Jody Mountain here with Lineage of Light and Living in Wonder. So we may have noticed by now that the navigation that we are engaged in has to do with a lot with us and our internal world, in how we see, in what we're listening to, etc. And I wanted to offer another ancient principle that will speak about that a bit more. And that principle is that each of us are living at the center of our own universe. So it's based on, again, this ancient indigenous wisdom that really had a very practical and true way of seeing the nature of reality. And the nature of reality is that each of us is seeing everything in our lives, in our experience, and experiencing everything from our perspective, and only from our perspective. We are only able to perceive what we perceive, that everything is in effect landing in us. When we go to any event, everyone is having their own experience. And I'm sure we've all noticed this, going to any event or observing anything and noticing that different people see different things, have the experience of in different ways. And we can't see through somebody else's eyes. We might be able to have empathy, or we might be able to imagine what it's like to be them, but we don't actually know, and we don't actually experience what it's like to be them, because actually that would require being born as them and feeling every influence that impacted that person, all the tiny ways in which that person was formed to become the complex being that they are today. So it's just, in this realm anyway, it's not possible to be in someone else's shoes. We can only be in our own shoes, and we can only receive the world as we receive it. And so that is partially why there is such an emphasis on actually observing and becoming more aware of how we see, becoming more aware of what has been placed in our way of experiencing life, what ideas have been placed in our way of being in relationship with life. And so the ideal place for each of us to ground ourselves in our reality is at the center of our universe. This is a different conversation. It's a different idea that I'm speaking about than the idea that was popular a few years ago, and maybe is still popular in some people's reality, that it's all about me. You know, remember when that was here? It's all about me. This is not what I'm speaking about. What I'm speaking about is to recognize that I'm the one perceiving my life, and that everything that is occurring in my existence is actually circulating around this perception, not necessarily in the center of my universe. That I have to be the perceiver. If I'm going to be alive, I am the perceiver. And so as we work with the perceiver, we go deeper and deeper towards the center of that perceiver. And I'll speak, that's a little bit further along, I'll speak about what we might discover. But let's just say for now that we're getting closer and closer at the center of the center, closer and closer to the head of our household. So as the perceiver of our world and our experience and our life, we can ground ourselves in different aspects, different kauna, different depths of experience of who we are. We can ground ourselves in the surface reality of our perceptions, the surface reality that includes a lot of our programming and ideas and assumptions. And we can also have our attention drop down so that we can ground ourselves in deeper and deeper aspects of who we are, that are beyond, let's say, that are past those assumptions that we may have come to believe, or belief systems. So the navigation, again, which you've heard before, how do we do that? How do we drop down to more depth of perception in the center of our universe? How do we operate at the kauna of life instead of at the kauna of ideas and our learned perceptions? Well, that has to do with the spirit, the seed of life, the spark of life that ignited us and that made us who we are as a living being. And so we drop in again to listening to our system in a more pure sense, in a more pure way. So if I'm just listening to my breath, if I'm just listening to the air on my back, the air on my skin, as an event, an experience of life meeting life, I find myself in that dimensionality of life. And I find myself a little bit more expanded, let's say, in my perception. So the perception of the mind being more or less narrow and the perception of spirit being more or less wider is what I believe this paradigm speaks about, and guiding us to be in a wider and wider perception of ourselves as we rest at the center of our universe. Now, we can and do place in our imaginary conceptual life, we tend to place other things at the center of our universe. Things like our relationship, money, our children. Children are a little bit tricky because children are a part of our own personal field for a good long time before we end up being in our own center of the universe, because children can be dependent on us. But let's take money for an example. So you'll know that you have conceptually placed something at the center of your universe when you get very upset. You are thrown off your balance when something happens to that. So when something happens to my financial well-being, I lose it. That means that I had placed my financial well-being at the center of my universe. If something happens to my relationship, if I do that with my conceptual existence, if something happens to my relationship, I just lose it. I can't function anymore because I had placed my relationship at the center of my universe. And some of the reason why we go into a deep conflict in these times, I believe, is because that's not actually true. Nothing can actually be in the center of your universe except for you and your perceptions, because you are ultimately the one making the decision about how to move forward in your life. The money doesn't actually make the decision. The money has no power. It's just our perception of the money being abundant or being low. And then my actual center of the universe is completely in flux depending on that. So essentially, I've given my power away to that quality or that relationship or that money or that relationship with my parents or whatever it might be. Of course, we all want to be abundant. We all want to have good relationships with our family. We all want to be in a harmonious relationship with our partners. It's not that those things are necessarily bad or wrong. It's just that when something takes the place of your own well-being, then we can no longer make a decision from a place of well-being. Suddenly, if I'm thrown off, I'm making a decision from chaos and not from well-being. So notice today what you have placed in the center of your universe so far in your life. You might be in a fantastic place of equilibrium where your well-being, your harmony and your exploration of yourself is in the center. Therefore, nothing can throw you off balance unless you throw your own self off balance in your center, unless you feel that you're not navigating in a probably from the head of your household way. And notice if something else you've placed something else in the middle and what that might be. And that will give you an idea maybe of some ways that life has been a bit out of balance, that we have essentially given up our well-being for the well-being of that we have placed at the center of our universe. And seeing as how we're the ones who are our only constant, let's say, our experience of life, our spirit, our existence is the one that we will be with for the rest of our lives and potentially beyond, if that's your belief system. That's a very important being to be in relationship with and in alignment with. So I encourage you to do that exploration today, and I'm excited to see what you find. Aloha, everyone.